All right, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting of the Coastal Pelagic Management Board to order. My name is Bob Beal. I am the stand-in chair for this meeting. Spud Woodward was not able to join in person, and he asked me to step in as chair, and I'm happy to do that. Spud is online, so he's listening and will be fully participating in the meeting. It's just tricky to chair a meeting from Georgia rather than in the room here. So that's why I am sitting up in front of the room instead of Spud. So with that, we'll get up and running for the Coastal Pelagic Board. I'd like to go to Tony first to announce all the commissioners that are participating virtually in this meeting rather than in the meeting room. So Tony, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have Emerson Hasbrook from New York. I have Brian Turner from North Carolina, Carrie Kennedy from Maryland, Spud Woodward from Georgia, Malcolm Rhodes from South Carolina, and John Carmichael is not here today. And Emily, remind me who your NOAA rep is? No one from NOAA is on today. Okay, there we go.
All right, great. Thanks, Tony. Moving along to the board consent items, are there any changes or additions or subtractions to the board agenda? Not seeing any objection to approving the agenda as drafted. All right, the agenda stands as it is. And if anything comes up under other business as the meeting goes along, we can add that toward the end of the meeting. Any comments or edits to the proceedings from October of 2024 for this board? Not seeing any hands, those proceedings are approved. Is there any public comment at this time for the Coastal Pelagic Board, either in the room or online? I see no hands in the room and no hands online, so we'll keep moving right along. The first action item for the board to consider is the approval of the 2027 Atlantic Cobia Stock Assessment Terms of Reference, and Angela Giuliano is going to present those, and whenever you're ready. Angela, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Yes, but is this slide up yet? That's what I was looking for. Okay. So I'll be reviewing the draft terms of reference for the upcoming Cobia stock assessment. Just as some background, this stock assessment was initially started back in 2024 through CDAR 95. While we had gotten that assessment underway and were in the middle of the data workshop, the assessment was paused due to the availability of a lead analyst, and that assessment has remained paused until this year. So the assessment will be restarting here in early 2026 with an anticipated completion and peer review in 2027. Whereas the previous assessment was going through the CDAR process entirely, this current version of the assessment will be coordinated through ASMFC for the data, methods, and assessment workshops, and CDAR will be coordinating the peer review workshop and report. So this is similar to how some other commission species are handled, such as menhaden and red drum. However, it's part of the new CDAR process, and just the length of time that it's been, the assessment has been renumbered for CDAR to now be CDAR 107. Back in December of 2025, the board approved the stock assessment subcommittee membership for the Cobia assessment, and so that's listed here on the slide, as well as the staff contacts. Given the length of time and the restart of the assessment, the technical committee and stock assessment subcommittee did meet in December to develop an updated draft terms of reference for board consideration. These are fairly similar to what was approved previously. It was mainly converting it from the CDAR format into the commission format. One thing to note is that there are actually two sets of tours that were in the meeting materials. The first is the assessment terms of reference, which give direction to the stock assessment subcommittee as they're preparing the assessment, as well as the peer review panel. These tours basically mirror each other. So when I go through the following slides, I'm just going to read the assessment tours and not the peer review panel ones. So the first tour is to identify the relevant ecosystem influences on the stock, including impacts to range shifts and/or expansions. Consider findings as appropriate in addressing other tours. Report how the findings were considered under impacted tours. The second term of reference is to investigate all available life history data, including but not limited to age, growth, reproductive characteristics, stock structure, and natural mortality. Describe the spatial and temporal distribution of the data and characterize the uncertainty and error. Also discuss the strengths and weaknesses of the data sources and justify inclusion or elimination of data sets. The third tour is to investigate available fishery independent and dependent data sets, again, characterizing precision, accuracy, and certainty for any available abundance indices, as well as commercial and recreational landings and discards. Include the estimation of length and age distribution of landings and discards discard mortality is feasible. As part of this tour, we'll also are instructed to review the new MRIP estimates of catch and effort for use in the assessment if available. And again, discuss the strengths and weaknesses of the available data sources and justify inclusion or elimination of the data sets. The fourth term of reference is to develop models used to estimate population parameters such as fishing mortality and abundance and reference points, and analyze model performance. Provide comparisons between the current assessment and the prior benchmark assessment, CDAR 58, where feasible. And this includes providing model diagnostics, sensitivity analyses, retrospective analysis of the model results, and a historical retrospective. Tour 5 is to update or redefine biological reference points, for example, point estimates or proxies of BMSY, SSB MSY, FMSY, and MSY. Define stock status based on reference points where possible, and compare these reference points from this assessment with what is known about the general life history of the exploited stock. Compare and contrast the reference points and time series estimates in this assessment with values from the previous benchmark CDAR 58 as feasible, and comment on the impacts of changes in data, assumptions, or assessment methods on estimated population conditions. Tour 6 is if a minority report has been filed to explain the majority reasoning against adopting the approach suggested in that report, and the minority report should explain the reasoning against adopting the approach suggested by the majority. Tour 7 is to develop detailed short and long-term prioritized lists of recommendations for future research, data collection, and assessment methodology. Tour 8 is to recommend timing of the next benchmark assessment and any intermediate updates if necessary relative to the biology and current management of cobia. And this last tour, Tour 9, is specific to the peer review panel, directing them to prepare a peer review report summarizing their evaluation of the stock assessment and addressing each peer review term of reference. As part of that, they're required to complete and submit their report within 4 weeks of the workshop conclusion. So those are the tours as drafted by the technical committee and stock assessments subcommittee for the upcoming benchmark, and I can now take any questions from the board about them.
Great, thank you, Angela. Before we get to questions, I just want to announce that there is a NOAA representative participating in the meeting now. They just logged in. Rick DeVictor from the Southeast Regional Office is online. So we're all set with NOAA representation. So questions on the terms of reference? Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Angela. Good trip through the TORs there. I had a quick question. Actually, if we could flip back to TOR 1. And so I wonder, this is the ecosystem influences, and I just was curious as to how it maybe not, you might not have had a chance to talk about this yet, because I know we're early in the kind of revamping of all of this, but you know, is this going to be just like a little report, like when we were doing black sea bass, they had this ESP report. So is it that kind of thing, or is it going to be more integrated with the actual modeling, or is it just going to be maybe like a paragraph or two in the report that says what you looked at? And I'm just curious about, you know, how this one kind of will play into the product that we see at the end.
So at a minimum, I think it will be a literature review with some sort of summary. I think the ability to incorporate it into the modeling really will depend on what model we end up going with, given the data limitations, as well as what data are available. So at this point, not too much information to offer, but it's definitely something to be thinking about with cobia, given the range expansion and shift of the stock.
Great, thanks. Other questions or comments on the terms of reference? Jason, again.
If no one else can ask another question, I will. And this is just given like some of the background with the model for cobia. I think there's like a candidate model people are thinking about using. I wondered, I mean, I think there's like limited resources here, so I'm not expecting you're going to be running like 6 different models or anything like that. But I am concerned, I think there were concerns about convergence of the model or the model working the last go around. And so I wondered, there's a strategy that I think we've used it here at the commission as well, but certainly with the feds where you have like, I don't think we call it the same more, but there was a time we were calling it the Plan B model. It's just sort of like a simple version in the background. So you're not left with nothing in the end if your kind of main model doesn't work. So is that something that's being considered? Is it like could you assume it's, I can't remember which one, TOR 5 maybe, which is the one that talks about the models, if that's being contemplated, or if not, if it could be.
So the hope is to continue using the BAM model, the Beaufort assessment model, which has been used in the past. cobia is kind of in a weird situation between being a full benchmark versus an update. One of the limitations from last time when this assessment was getting started was concern over the index that was used last time, which was from the Southeast Region Headboat Survey, and whether we can update that given changes to the fishery. So I think, getting an index or developing an index is probably one of the first priorities here. And then, yeah, I know last time we had talked about potentially having some data limited options for modeling, but with the current iteration of our new SAS, we have not gotten into those sorts of details. So it came up before. We'll see where the current group ends up.
Great, thanks. And one of the other things that this assessment is relying on is the new recalibrated MRIP data with the new FES estimate. So we're not exactly sure when that will be available. We heard it's still under review yesterday when Richard Cody gave the presentation, but we're hoping it'll be summer, whatever exactly that might mean, that we get that data. So that might be a bottleneck. Any other comments or questions on terms of reference? Dr. McNamee, you good? All right. All right, is there a motion to approve these terms of reference? I think there's a motion drafted that will go up on the board momentarily. Mr. Hamans.
Yes, sir. I move to approve the terms of reference for the 2027 Atlantic cobia stock assessment and peer review.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion? Dr. McNamee, thank you. Any justification or discussion? I'll start with you, Doug, in case there is any.
No, I thought we had good discussion of the terms from Jason, and I have no issues with them and move forward.
Jason says he's all set as well. Any other comments or any objection around the table to approving these terms of reference? All right, not seeing any, they stand approved. Thank you. So that brings us to the next steps in the timeline for cobia management. Kind of where do we go from here in the short term while we wait for the assessment to get completed? And Emily is going to give a presentation on that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this presentation is to remind the board sort of where we are, what's coming up for cobia management in the next year, and some of the timing considerations and challenges to keep in mind. So sort of as an overview here, so coming up this year, the board may consider new specifications for 2027 and potentially beyond that, and also consider recreational management measures for 2027 and potentially beyond that. A couple things to keep in mind is the revised MRIP, when that is available and what the impacts of that may be, and also the timing of the stock assessment, which is anticipated to inform measures in 2028. So some of the challenges here with the timing lining up. And then kind of in the background, just a reminder of the confidence interval approach, which is something that the board can use if the board would like, but just a reminder of what that is, and it's sort of in the background if needed. So first on specifications, the current specifications for cobia expire at the end of this year, the end of 2026. The total annual harvest quota for both sectors is 80,112 fish. This is the same quota that's been in place since 2020. So with these specifications expiring, the board would consider new specifications for at least next year, 2027. Per the new addendum, the board can set specifications for up to 5 years, so potentially up to 2031 if the board would like. One timing thing to keep in mind, as I mentioned, is the stock assessment, which is anticipated to be complete to inform quota levels in 2028. So just sort of keeping in mind when that stock assessment may become available. So the cobia TC, as in past specification cycles, will plan to meet this year sometime prior to the summer meeting to discuss any TC recommendations on the total harvest quota for 2027. However, as was discussed at the last time the board met, there is a bit of a challenge in that we have very limited information to inform these 2027 specifications. So projections from the last cobia stock assessment only extended through 2024. So we're in the same data limited situation the board was in a couple of years ago when the board was considering these current 2024 to 2026 specs. So just sort of a reminder that the TC is going to have very limited information to work with here. So the next thing coming down the pipe this year is the regional recreational measures. So when the board sets specification, that triggers an evaluation of average recreational harvest against the harvest targets to determine any changes to the recreational measures. So as a reminder, we're now in this regional framework. So we have our northern region, which is Rhode Island through Virginia, and the southern region, which is North Carolina through Georgia. So for any evaluation, the evaluation only includes years that have been under the same recreational management measures. So management measures did change last year in 2025 for the northern region. So that means that when we do this evaluation at the end of this year, there's only going to be 1 year of data, 2025, to include in that evaluation to determine what measures would be next year. So that's sort of the big challenge there that the board had identified at the last meeting. And then a couple other things to think about here as well. So we have this revised MRIP time series, and that revised time series could potentially change the allocation percentages between the two regions. So the regional allocations are based on landings from 2014 to 2023. And the FMP does allow the board to update those allocation percentages via board vote if those underlying MRIP data are updated. So the board anticipated the MRIP time series might be updated. So the board has the ability to, recalculate the 2014 to 2023 landings to potentially update those allocation percentages. So depending on the timing of the release of these MRIP data, there could be time to update those allocations and regional targets in time for this year's evaluation to inform 2027 measures. So that's sort of one factor to keep in mind. The next, again, is the stock assessment, again, anticipated to inform 2028 management. So if the stock assessment leads to a new harvest quota in 2028, this would also update those regional harvest targets for 2028. And so then there would be another evaluation to inform 2028 measures. So potentially there could be 2 evaluations for changes to recreational measures in 2 consecutive years. So in the past, the board has actually encountered this challenge of having 2 evaluations of recreational measures and making changes 2 years in a row. So back in 2023, the board was doing an evaluation for 2024. However, the board was anticipating things might change again in 2025 with the new allocations. So in that situation at the time, the board did task the TC with evaluating the impact of staying status quo for that 1 year in 2024, and then making the changes then later in 2025 once things were updated with the allocations. So that's what happened. The board did decide to keep status quo in 24 and then reevaluated things in 25 after those new allocations. So just a reminder of a similar situation the board was in a couple years ago. And then finally, the last thing I want to cover, again, this is sort of in the background in the FMP available to the board if the board desired, is the confidence interval approach. So the confidence interval approach allows the board to change the method for these recreational harvest evaluations. So currently we're comparing the average harvest across years to the target. Alternatively, this provision would allow the board to instead compare the 95% confidence intervals around those harvest estimates to the target to determine if any reductions need to be taken. I'm not going to get into the details any further than that, but last time the board met, the TC did take a look at what that approach might look like as applied to data a couple of years ago, but the TC noted that more board discussion would be helpful here. The board agreed more discussion would be helpful, but it was a little unclear sort of how to proceed and exactly what questions to ask. And again, we have these challenges of thinking about this confidence interval approach. At the same time, we're thinking about specifications and the timing of the revised MRIP and the stock assessment. So a lot kind of going on in the next few years. So just looking ahead from a staff perspective, so before the 2026 meeting, as I mentioned, the summer meeting, the TC will plan to meet to discuss any recommendations for the 2027 quota. And then in the summer meeting, the board would consider at least the 2027 quota. Again, the board could consider setting additional years as well. And then by the annual meeting, there would be a TC report on the evaluation of the regional harvest against the targets for the board to consider 2027 rec measures. And then as revised MRIP become available, we'll keep the board updated on what potential regional allocations might look like with the new revised MRIP data. And then next year, we'll anticipate the stock assessment report. So from a staff perspective, this is what the year ahead is looking like. If there's any board questions or guidance on these TC tasks coming up, today would be helpful to discuss that. But happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks, Emily. So obviously there's a lot of moving parts there, a lot of challenges and timing issues with the recalibration of the MRIP data and the pending stock assessment and technical committee work, and just a lot of moving parts. So the question and the goal of this conversation is, one, to make sure the entire board fully understands everything that Emily just said. And if you have any questions, this is a great time to ask those. And then the second part is, what guidance, if any, does this board want to provide to the technical committee for additional analysis to inform some of these pending decisions that the board will be faced with. So with that explanation, are there any questions on what Emily said and timing and all these moving parts? I think this may be a cascading thing. The first question may lead into about 10 more, but are there any questions, or does everyone fully understand what Emily said? Doug, you look like you're reluctantly thinking about it.
Well, no, I have a comment.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah, comment's great.
Yeah, so just based on the number of moving parts, I'm perfectly content with status quo where we are through the 2028 assessment. And so I would think what you've got laid out there is fine, but I don't have a burning desire to reallocate or bump the quota right now. That's just from my perspective.
Other thoughts? Jason?
Yeah, a question. So I'm thinking a little bit about, you said two things. Thank you for the presentation first. And then you said two things in there that I'm wondering, I'm trying to like put them together. So the first is, so we had consistent measures and then we didn't have consistent measures. And it's only 1 year that we have that information on. And so how does that connect in with the confidence interval approach? Where does the confidence interval come from? Maybe I'm not kind of thinking of the data correctly, but I just having trouble thinking about like what would the confidence intervals be based on if we're only looking at a single year of information?
So for the confidence interval approach in the FMP, it's laid out in that if a majority of years you're looking at, if the confidence interval is above the target, then you would need a reduction. Obviously, if we're just looking at 1 year of data, it seems like it would just be what's happening in that 1 year, where is the target relative to that confidence interval. So similar to if we keep the average approach, we just basically still have 1 year of data that we're looking at. So the FMP never really got into the scenario of what if we only have 1 year of data. I think when the FMP was originally developed, there was an assumption that there would be at least a couple years under the same management regime, but because of all the timing challenges these past few years, we've ended up sort of out of alignment with all of these timing aspects.
Other comments or questions? Yes, Ben.
Sure. Yeah, kind of a comments and then maybe some questions. I kind of second Doug's comment, looking at what we see now. We've talked about management whiplash in the past, going from what we've had, at least in South Carolina, standards that have been set for quite a while. And then all of a sudden to change them and then potentially in the very next year, change them again. So there's obviously concerns there, especially with our legislative process and trying to change those things in South Carolina through that without having a commission. So I have this coming. I don't know when that comes into play. If that's not until the summer that we need to really make that decision, but just wanted to get that on the record. And then kind of following up on Jay's comment. So according to FMP, I understand the confidence interval. When can the board determine that at any time? Like when would we want to time that along with a stock assessment? And also let me be clear, I have very large concerns about using confidence intervals, but just curious about when the timing of that would be. Thank you.
Yeah, so for the confidence interval approach, the board can vote at any time to switch to that approach. So there's no sort of constraints on when the board can do it. It's essentially the board at any time can determine, we don't think the average approach is appropriate anymore. We would like to switch to doing the confidence interval approach. So at any time, the board can decide to do that.
Thank you.
Yes, Jesse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I support, waiting to change stuff until we have more information. But I also think it's important that the TC looks at, any potential issues with maintaining status quo for the next couple of years. So we have something to be more comfortable with that decision if we do.
Dr. McNamee.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the comment that Jesse just made. And so I was kind of wondering, have there been like some indicators that we can look at? I know there's just like, generally speaking, not a ton of data. We don't have like, trawl surveys and things like that for cobia, but to get to what Jesse just said, having some indicators that we can look at, I think would be helpful to give us some comfort. I'm in alignment here. There's so many things, like fundamental things like data that are changing, that it will be really hard to make a informed judgment on how to move. But I mean, if we saw a troubling signal in something in what we have available to us, I think it's something we would want to consider. So I don't have anything specific for you, maybe like a MRIP CPUE type of a index or something like that would be valuable, but anything that the technical committee can kind of put their hands on and show as, here's what's available. Don't put too much stock in this one. It's not a stock assessment. It's just an indicator. Like, we understand all of that, but just to give us something to kind of look at, to get some confidence, and we're okay. We can kind of pitch this out a little while longer before we have better information to make judgments on. That's what I'm hoping we could get.
Yes, so the last time I mentioned that a couple of years ago, when the board tasked the TC with looking at what's the impact if we just stayed status quo for a year before we change things, I believe the TC looked at essentially just realized harvest against what the projections used as the assumed removals, and sort of compared that and provided an analysis to the board. So I think the TC could do the same thing, looking at realized harvest. Outside of that, I don't think there are really many other indicators, but from what it sounds like you said, Jesse, Ben, and Doug, it sounds like there's interest in the TC doing a similar analysis this time to look at what's the impact if we stayed status quo for 2027 and waited for the assessment to change recreational measures. So it sounds like there's support for that. So I think the TC would have that on their list of analyses for later this year. As far as timing for that, I think we'd actually bring that back at the annual meeting. So the summer meeting would be focused on the total harvest quota levels. And then at the annual meeting, we would come back and say, based on that total harvest quota, what would, if we looked at just 2025, what would that look like? If we kept status quo, what would that look like? Maybe we could be done in time for the summer meeting with both. We'll have to see, but either the summer or annual meeting for all of these things.
All right. Thank you, Emily. Other comments or questions on that path forward and the timing of that? All right. I thought Emily was going to volunteer for the spring meeting, since she'll be out on maternity leave and she can, task everybody else with doing work while she's enjoying her new expanding family. Is there anything else on this issue? The TC, is Emily comfortable? Angela, you comfortable with the tasking? Okay. So we'll go forward with that. And as the meeting goes along, if there's something you guys think of, we can come back to this. We have time, since we started a bit early. So moving along, we'll go to the FMP review and state compliance for Atlantic Cobia. Emily, please.
Great, thank you. So I will get into the FMP review for Cobia, just starting with status of the FMP. Again, we're working under Amendment 1, Addendum 1, and the most recent Addendum 2 that moved us to that recreational regional management framework. I mentioned we've had the same total harvest quota for Cobia in place since 2020. The allocation of that quota is 96% to recreational, 4% to commercial. We're focused on the FMP review for fishing year 2024. In 2024, there were no management changes, so things were the same as the prior couple of years. And just as a reminder, there are no Cobia monitoring requirements in the FMP. For the commercial fishery is managed with the coastwide commercial quota, again, 4% of that overall total quota. There's a minimum size limit, 2 fish per person possession limit, and a 6 fish per vessel maximum. And then we also have a commercial closure trigger. So for all those non-de minimis states, if all of those landings reach the specific trigger, then the fishery is closed and the states have a 30-day notice for that closure. For the 2024 recreational fishery, we were still under the state-by-state allocations at that time. So we have those non-de minimis states, again, have a minimum size limit. The seasons and vessel limits did vary by state, but there is a maximum 6 fish per vessel and a 1 fish per person bag limit. And then for all the de minimis states, that's from Maryland northward, states could either choose to match their nearest non-de minimis state, so Maryland and Potomac River matched Virginia, and then Rhode Island through Delaware implemented the sort of standard de minimis measures, which were a lower minimum size and a 1 fish vessel limit. So again, last year we switched over to the regional framework. So the northern region did have to take a reduction. They increased their minimum size, have a 2 fish vessel limit. So just a reminder, that did happen last year, but today we're focused on the 2024 fishing year. Status of the stock, Angela just went over this, but again, this last assessment was a while ago, had a terminal year of 2017, indicated the stock at the time was not overfished and overfishing was not occurring. So we have our new assessment anticipated to be complete next year with a terminal year of 2025. So as far as status of the fishery, in 2024, total landings across both sectors were about 1.7 million pounds. That broke down into almost exactly what the allocation is, about 4% commercial, 96% recreational. This was about a 40% decrease from 2023, and this was driven by a decrease in recreational landings in 24. So on the commercial side, things actually slightly increased from 23. In 24, commercial landings were about 70,546 pounds. The commercial quota was not exceeded, and the fishery did close on December 18th based on that closure trigger. And then Virginia and North Carolina comprise the majority of commercial cobia landings, over 96%. So you can see here, this is commercial landings over time. That black line, the last few years, that's the commercial quota. You can see landings have been relatively stable, sort of hovering right around that quota. On the recreational side, in 24, landings were about 54,000 fish, or about 1.6 million pounds. Again, this was a decrease by about 45% from 2023. It was the lowest harvest since 2017. So the harvest was obviously well below the coast-wide quota, which is about 77,000 fish, and also well below the 10-year average harvest as well. And sort of aligning with that decrease in harvest, we did see directed trips also decrease by about 21%. Live releases, about 80% of the 2024 catch was released alive. So here you can see the recreational harvest, and then again, the last few years, you can see that's the quota. So we tend to see this with cobia, sort of we have some high years where we exceeded the quota, interspersed with some lower years where we were below, or in the case of 2024, well below the quota. So by state, in 2024, Virginia harvested the vast majority, with the other states comprising less than 10% each. North Carolina did specifically note that their harvest estimates for 23 and 24 were very low compared to prior years. They noted that historically, the primary wave of cobia typically would arrive in late May, be around for about 6 weeks. But the past few years, it seems that cobia have been migrating to the Chesapeake Bay much earlier. So they've been available in North Carolina waters for a much shorter period of time. And then South Carolina's 2024 estimate was also very low compared to prior years, and it was their lowest since 2017. As a reminder, there were federal fishery closures in 2016 and 2017. So generally, the PRT continues to emphasize that there's a lot of factors influencing these changes in harvest from year to year, including the stock distribution, both north to south, inshore, offshore, the state regulatory changes and effort. As far as PRT comments and recommendations, the PRT found no inconsistencies in implementation of the FMP. As far as de minimis on the recreational side, Rhode Island, Delaware, Maryland, and Florida all request and do qualify for de minimis. On the commercial side, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Georgia, and Florida all request and do qualify for de minimis. And the PRT notes that multiple states, especially in the Mid-Atlantic, could potentially exceed de minimis thresholds over the next few years if cobia landings do continue to increase in the Mid-Atlantic. As I mentioned, some years landings are quite high in some of these states, some years they're quite low. So what this means is on the commercial side, if you become a non-de minimis state, then you have to submit weekly in-season landings reports to the commission that we monitor toward that commercial closure. On the recreational side, the de minimis designation actually no longer has any impact because we've moved to that regional management framework. All the states in our region have the same measures, so there's no differentiation between de minimis measures and non-de minimis measures there. The PRT just notes that this new assessment is really important. It's going to add several years of data, 2018 through 2025. So that will capture the recent trends of the increased landings in the Mid-Atlantic, particularly in Virginia, and the transition to commission-only management. And the PRT emphasizes the importance of incorporating the new revised MRIP into the assessment. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions on the FMP review or PRT comments on state compliance? Yeah, Roy Miller, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Emily, for the summary. What was the de minimis threshold in terms of recreational landings percentage?
So for recreational, it's less than 1% of the coastwide landings for 2 out of the past 3 years. For commercial, it's less than 2%.
If I may follow up, just out of curiosity, Maryland is 3%. Does that mean that they are likely to go off de minimis?
So that's a great question. So in 2024, Maryland was 3%, and Angela can speak more to this, but the MRIP estimates for Maryland the prior years, 23 and 22, I think were both 0. So I think Maryland is one of the examples of the difficulty of capturing MRIP or capturing cobia landings through MRIP. Obviously, cobia are being caught in Maryland, but Maryland's had a couple of 0 MRIP estimate years, so it's hard to say what the estimates will look like.
Emily, I'll take chair's prerogative and ask a question. So Florida is qualified for de minimis for recreational and commercial fisheries. However, they're not part of the management unit that ASMFC manages, which is the Florida Georgia line northward up to Rhode Island. Does this board need to grant them de minimis, and does that provide a benefit to Florida?
So my understanding is that because Florida has been on this board and they do catch cobia, but they catch a different stock. They catch the Gulf stock. Essentially, Florida submits a compliance report every year that says, we have caught 0 Atlantic cobia. And so it's sort of an administrative step to submit that compliance report, but they are part of the Gulf stock.
All right, great. Thank you. That's helpful. Any other questions or comments? All right, not seeing any. Is there a motion to approve the FMP review and de minimis requests? John Clark, I think a motion will come up on the board momentarily.
Yeah, I can read
There
that. Okay, move to approve the Atlantic cobia FMP review for the 2024 fishing year, state compliance reports, and de minimis requests from Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Georgia, and Florida.
Okay, thank you, John. Is there a second to the motion? Joe Gris, thank you. Any comments on the motion? I don't know, John, if you have any justification.
No, I think it was all well explained by Emily. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any objection to approving the FMP review and de minimis requests? Not seeing any, this motion stands approved. I think one administrative thing we may want to consider, does it make sense and is it worth the burden to Florida to submit an FMP review, or I mean a state compliance report for saying they didn't catch any Atlantic cobia group and they are part of the Gulf group? I mean, is that necessary for this board to see that every year, or is it just an assumption based on where the line is drawn in this FMP? I don't know if Florida has a comment on that or if any other board members, but it may be, I don't know, I'm just looking to maybe take away a burden from Florida if it really doesn't serve a lot of value to this board. So I don't know, Jeff, if you have a comment, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. It's not much of a burden for us to submit this report, and it's, it keeps us involved as well in case the stock boundaries were to change. It kind of keeps an eye on that as well. So it doesn't really create much of a burden to add that to this report every year.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, Tony?
I think when staff can evaluate this, I think you can continue to send us in your compliance report saying you have zero harvest, but I actually don't think we need to ask for you to ask for de minimis because you're not in the management unit at this time. Obviously, if that were to change ever, we can, make that change, but because you're not in the management unit, you're not obligated to move forward any of the regulations. And so therefore you're getting de minimis for nothing that I'm aware of. So that part doesn't really make sense to me, but we can evaluate it and then come and then get back to you and Erica.
Yeah, one option may be that, Florida continues to submit the reports as they are. And then in the FMP review, we note Florida submitted a report and didn't catch any cobia from the Atlantic group, and just, leave it at that. And maybe we don't have to go through the de minimis process for Florida, but we can think about that. I'm not pushing either way. Ben, do you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I didn't know if they're declared interest, is there a requirement to provide some type of documentation of harvest and catch for the FMP review, number one, and then number two, I mean, obviously be something different. Wouldn't want to put extra burden if not necessary. But as Jeff commented, it's really not a big lift, and especially with the upcoming conversations that we're having regarding kind of declared interest in voting rights and privileges and things like that, to see how that kind of comes out. To change something now preemptive to that, I would just maybe suggest staying the course. If it's not a big lift and it's not a big deal, that would just be my 2 cents. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very fair comment. Thanks, Ben. Joe, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Just was hoping to get maybe an update on the stock boundaries, like knowing that an assessment is coming up. Just getting a feel for where that exploration has been and where it may go in the near future.
Yes, so part of the last assessment, CDAR 58, there was a full stock ID workshop conducted through CDAR, and the recommendation coming out of that workshop was to have that boundary at the Florida-Georgia line. So for this assessment, there's not a full workshop, so there's no sort of plan to change the stock boundary. The terms of reference do include a review of any new data. Specifically, I know there's been some acoustic tagging studies that have been published in the past few years to sort of update the sort of background on that stock ID and to discuss any uncertainty and things like that. But through this assessment, the stock boundary would not change.
Great. Anything else on this topic before we go into Spanish mackerel FMP review? All right, not seeing any. Emily, if you could present the Spanish mackerel FMP review and state compliance report, please.
So switching gears to Spanish mackerel, today we're looking at the FMP review for the past 2 years, so 2023 and 2024 fishing years. So as far as the FMP, there haven't been any management changes at the commission level since 2011. That was the omnibus amendment. The management unit is Rhode Island through Florida, only the Atlantic coast of Florida, with the exception of Connecticut. And similar to cobia, there are no Spanish mackerel monitoring requirements in the FMP. The FMP is managed through complementary management with the South Atlantic Council, and council staff will be providing an update on council activity right after this presentation. There are some differences between the federal and interstate Spanish mackerel FMPs. The board has been briefed on these, and the board has noted in the past that the board would discuss these differences the next time the board takes any sort of Spanish mackerel action. The recreational fishery and commercial fishery are both managed using a minimum size limit. There's also a creel limit for the rec fishery and some gear restrictions for both sectors. And then the commercial fishery is subject to daily trip limits. New York through Georgia, it's a daily 3,500 pound trip limit. Florida is a little bit different, sort of a step down approach depending on how much of the quota has been taken. Status of the stock, the last Spanish mackerel assessment was completed in 2022 with a terminal year of 2020. It indicated the stock was not overfished and not experiencing overfishing based on a 3-year average fishing mortality. The assessment team noted that in the terminal year of the assessment, the fishing mortality rate was above the threshold. So if that higher fishing mortality rate were to continue, it's possible the stock could fall into an overfishing status. I'll get into sort of the stats here for 23 and 24. Just a reminder that all the landings in the FMP review are calendar year. And again, any Florida landings are Atlantic coast only. So in 23 and 24, total landings in 23 was about 8 million pounds. In 24, 8.2 million pounds, pretty similar. Comprised of about between 33 to 36% commercial, 64 to 67% recreational. On the commercial side, both years landings were about 2.7, 2.8 million pounds. Only 3 states have directed Spanish mackerel commercial fisheries. That's Florida, North Carolina, and Virginia. In commercial landings, we saw a peak in 2021, followed by lower levels the past 3 years. This was largely driven by decreases that we saw in Florida, which I'll touch on in a little bit. Another sort of thing to note is that Virginia's commercial landings for the past 6 years have been higher than their landings in the previous decade. Virginia noted, there's a lot of factors here, one of which is their extended drift gill net program that has become a new licensed fishery in the state as of last year. There's also a lot to think about in terms of fish availability, such as, when are the Spanish mackerel moving into the bay, and if those fish are available. So here are the commercial landings over time. Again, you can clearly see that peak in 21, and the past 3 years, landings have been at a bit of a lower level. On the recreational side, landings in 23 and 24 were between 5.2 and 5.5 million pounds. Again, this is a decrease from the peak in 2021, but above the 10-year average. And Florida and North Carolina account for the majority of landings. As far as live releases, we saw a decrease in 2023 and then again in 2024. And these live releases comprise between 40 to 49% of the catch those 2 years. So here you can see the recreational landings in blue and then the number of fish released alive in red. Again, you can clearly see that peak in 2021 and then the lower levels the past 3 years. A couple of sort of state-specific notes here. North Carolina did flag its MRIP estimates from 2024. Their 2024 harvest estimates were much higher than their 10-year average, 77% higher in weight. Their release estimates were about 30% higher than the 10-year average. So North Carolina noted this 2024 value seems to be unusually high and diverging from anecdotal observation. They noted potentially it was skewed by a limited number of intercepts in 2024. They also noted their PSEs for 2024 were a little bit higher than PSEs in prior years. And then as far as some of the comments about the decreases we've seen in Florida, Florida noted that there have been increases in areas that have been closed to vessels associated with space launches. And so that has prevented access to fishing areas, and that has potentially contributed to the decrease in effort and decrease in landings. And then during the port meetings conducted by the South Atlantic Council, Florida stakeholders noted several concerns, including concerns about shark depredation, water quality, weather conditions in federal waters, the potential of fish shifting more northward, being less available, and changing effort dynamics, sort of all impacting the Florida Spanish mackerel fisheries. As far as the PRT comments and recommendations, all states in 23 and 24 did implement management consistent with the FMP, except for one inconsistency that has since been addressed. So the Potomac River Fisheries Commission had not implemented the daily commercial trip limits of that 3,500 pounds. After they received notification of this, they were able to implement that within a couple of months. So that is now effective. And then as far as de minimis, if a state has their 3-year average of total landings is less than 1% of the coast-wide total, they receive de minimis status. So Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, and Georgia all request and do qualify. I will note for this FMP, there is no specific de minimis difference in the regulations, and there's no monitoring requirements. So there's no difference in monitoring requirements either. PRT recommendations, just some recommendations to better understand regional dynamics and sort of paying attention to any changes in catch by region, to better understand the life history component sort of in conjunction with the stock assessments, and to fully utilize available state data, especially trying to get some more data from Virginia northward, to continue to investigate discard mortality, and environmental drivers affecting the distribution, and also sort of the social and economic drivers affecting effort. These are all things that were brought up at the council's port meetings. And then again, continue coordination between the commission and the council to address any differences in the FMP. So happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Emily. Any questions on a Spanish mackerel presentation? All right, not seeing, yeah, Joe Grist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry for the pause. I was trying to get some data from my staff. I noted you made call out of my drift gill net fishery, which is predominantly targeting Spanish mackerel. I don't think I would call that a substantial fishery for cobia. I think overall they just sent back to me about 500 pounds of cobia in 2025, a little over 300 in 2024. I think compared to overall landings, that's pretty insignificant numbers. It's definitely not targeting cobia. I'm not sure why that got called out. I'm sure it has something to do with our report, and we'll look into it.
Great, thanks, Joe. Comments or questions? Not seeing any. Is there a motion to approve the FMP review and de minimis requests? Roy Miller, there'll be a motion coming up momentarily.
Move to approve the Spanish mackerel FMP review for the 2023 and 2024 fishing year, state compliance reports, and de minimis requests from Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, and Georgia.
Is there a second to that? Doug Hamans, thank you. Any justification, Roy, or pretty self-explanatory?
Pretty self-explanatory.
Great, thank you. All right, any objection to the approval of the motion that's on the board? Not seeing any, that motion stands approved. Thank you, Emily, for both of those reports. And that brings us to Spanish mackerel, an update on the where am I here? Oh yeah, the Spanish Mackerel Council activity for the South Atlantic Council. Christina Weingrad, council staff is online, and we're ready to go whenever you are, Christina. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. For those who don't know me, my name's Christina Wiegand Curtis. I'm the fisheries social scientist with the council and the lead for the Coastal Migratory Pelagics FMP. And I was asked to just briefly brief you all on where the council stands in terms of Atlantic Spanish mackerel management. Next slide. And so if you'll remember way back in 2024 now, the South Atlantic Council did a series of mackerel port meetings all up and down the coast. And the purpose of these meetings was to sort of acknowledge that there were significant changes happening in the king and Spanish mackerel fisheries and try to get a holistic view of those fisheries by working with stakeholders in all of these communities. I'm not going to go over that full report today, but there is a link to it on the council's website and on the presentation. Next slide. And so that process wrapped up at the end of 2024, beginning of 2025, and we presented the council with the results of that at their March 2025 meeting, going over sort of individual themes seen in each state, as well as similarities and differences seen up and down the coast. The council requested that that report go to their mackerel cobia advisory panel first, and then to have staff bring back detailed information on specific regulatory measures that the council could take in June of 2025. Next slide. And so we brought this information to the mackerel AP. They discussed the mackerel cobia report. They were also provided a sort of refresher on the CDAR 78 stock assessment and details on revisions to the FMP goals and objectives. They provided comment on all three of those things, but the important thing here is that the advisory panel did pass a motion recommending that the council request an update of the Spanish mackerel overfishing limit and ABC recommendations based on the results of that new FES pilot study before implementing any new catch levels, specifically those coming out of CDAR 78. Next slide. And so that AP report was provided to the council at their June 2025 meeting. And in particular, in response to that motion from the AP, they decided to sort of postpone work to address those Spanish mackerel catch levels coming from CDAR 78 until the results of that FES pilot study were received and could be incorporated into an updated stock assessment. They also requested that we work with the Science Center to see if we could move the next Spanish mackerel stock assessment to occur sooner in the schedule. With regard to recommendations from port meetings, there was a desire to sort of wait until we had new Spanish mackerel stock assessment and catch level recommendations. There was some discussion about sort of looking at recommendations from port meetings from a regulatory versus deregulatory standpoint. But as of right now, that work is not currently prioritized on the council's work plan. Next slide. And so in August 2025, the CDAR steering committee did meet and did agree to sort of rejigger the schedule a little bit to get the Spanish mackerel stock assessment a little bit earlier. So Spanish mackerel will now be occurring before the Vermilion snapper stock assessment. It's scheduled to start in 2027. If everything stays on schedule, things would go to the council. Results from that would go to the council probably late 2027, early 2028. Next slide. And so in December, the council did get that updated presentation on the FES pilot study. I'm not going to go into that in detail here, other than just to note that the tentative plan is to have full MREP estimates for wave 1 in 2027, and the council really noted the importance of having those recalibrated FES data available as soon as possible. And so we remain sort of cautiously optimistic that recalibrated data will be able to go into the Spanish mackerel stock assessment by its start in 2027. Next slide. And so with that, there's nothing related to Spanish mackerel that is currently on the council's work plan. Again, they would be looking to sort of address Spanish mackerel as well as recommendations from port meetings once we had results from this upcoming stock assessment scheduled to begin in early 2027. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I also just wanted to say thank you for all of the work that the state agency reps and staff and commission staff did to help make the macro port meetings endeavor such a success. I know John Carmichael has passed along our appreciation before, but since I'm the one here today, I wanted to sort of reiterate how much we appreciated all of the support during that process.
Great. Thank you, Christina. And we will also return the thanks to you and the council for, making the effort to go beyond the South Atlantic Council's jurisdiction and find, get perspectives from participants in the fishery north of North Carolina. So thank you for that. Any questions on process and progress with the South Atlantic Council? Chris Bat-Savage.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Christina, for the update. Kind of based on this timeline with your Spanish mackerel assessment, hopefully being done by 2027, and the South Atlantic Council considering the results of that assessment for an amendment. What do you think the timeline would be for that amendment to be complete? Because I suspect there's a pretty long list of issues that could be addressed in that amendment. And from that, I'll probably have a follow-up.
Thanks, Chris. That's a great question. I think it will ultimately depend on how the council decides to sort of package addressing catch levels from the stock assessment versus some of the things that came out of port meetings. If they decide to move forward with two separate amendments, catch level implementation could move quite a bit faster than maybe some of the port meetings recommendations that could be a little bit controversial, would require a more detailed amendment, likely one where we'd have to collaborate with the Gulf. And so that would sort of, timing will ultimately depend on how the council packages things, if they keep catch levels and port meetings separate or if they wrap it all into one large amendment.
Yeah, no, thank you. That sounds like a logical strategy, kind of breaking this up. With the other items outside of catch levels being taking a little more time, I suspect. I think it's probably worth considering how that's divvied, how that workload is divvied up, even amongst the councils and with this board. I think this is the 9th time we've gotten a Spanish mackerel management update from the South Atlantic Council since 2019. So there's some long-standing issues that need to be addressed sooner rather than later. And kind of thinking through the timeline you just gave, we could be looking at the early 2030s before this is all finalized. Considering that much of the Spanish mackerel fishery is a state waters fishery along most of its range. As this goes on, I think this board and the South Atlantic Council needs to think about what items might be better addressed in an ASMFC FMP, as opposed to trying to tackle all of that into a joint council FMP. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. Other comments or questions on Spanish mackerel? Jason.
Yeah, just to chime in and support what Chris was just talking about. He and I talked a little bit about this, and the arc has been long and continues on this species. And so I think it really, I think the idea would be to maybe kind of convene a little bit and see how to piece these things out, what might make sense for the commission to take on and leverage the nimbleness of the commission relative to the regional councils, and just to kind of start to turn the ship here a little bit, and correct some of the issues that have been identified for a really persistent period of time here that don't seem egregious, but just need some correction. And so I just wanted to support Chris in that. I like the idea of trying to help supplement what's going on at the federal level with some state action as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So just as a reminder, and Emily can fill in the blanks here, there are a number of differences between the state, interstate and federal fishery management plans for Spanish mackerel. I think there's a seasonal issue on the recreational side, maybe commercial as well. What happens when the quotas are landed in state waters? Federal waters close, and some states close, some step down to 500 pounds. We've got different gear types that are allowed. Is that right, Emily? And there's a couple other things. But so the question is, how does this board, and what's the timing of this board's interest in proceeding on kind of resolving some of those differences between the state and federal FMPs? And are there things that identified through the South Atlantic Council that this board might be able to help them out with? I surely don't want to get ahead of the South Atlantic Council on this, and clearly, especially in federal waters. But if there's something that the commission can do, as Jason said, the nimbleness of the commission to help out the South Atlantic Council, maybe that's a good conversation to have. So just it'd be interesting to hear what other folks think about that, and Christina, feel free to chime in if there's if there's the best venue to have that conversation on what pieces of this ASMFC could tackle to help out the South Atlantic Council. So any thoughts around the table? Then Christina, I'll go back to you and ask you if you have any thoughts. David Borden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just kind of curious, in terms of the problems you're noting on the regulatory side, are these more a case of the regulations not complementing each other or not being identical?
Not being identical, but I guess it would be up to sort of the board's interpretation of whether or not they think they're complementary. So I'll say one example is when the quota is caught, federal waters close, states are not required to close on the commercial side. So some states have voluntarily in the past decided to implement a lower trip limit. Other states have not. So that's sort of one of the bigger differences.
Okay, thank you, Emily.
Other thoughts? Yes, Chris Savage.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I think that's probably one of the biggest issues that should be addressed at some point, at least through the ASMS CFMP, is what to do when the commercial ACL is reached. I think it's I know that's an issue that that Zero has raised, that they have ACLs for a reason. Federal waters close, but the landings keep coming in even under lower trip limits, because that's where the fishery occurs. Just in terms of dividing up the workload, considering this is largely a state waters fishery for the commercial fisheries, is maybe looking at trip limits, at least in the northern zone. A 3,500 pound trip limit is really not constraining, and I think that kind of exacerbates some of the ACL overages that we've seen in the northern zone. And just because it's very controversial and time consuming, we may even want to consider looking at the allocation differences between the northern and southern zones for the commercial fishery. I think that, tied in with the other items that the South Atlantic Council is hoping to address, could draw out even just that portion of the FMP pretty long. And that's something that isn't really reliant on an updated stock assessment or updated FES estimates. It's just looking at whatever amount goes to the commercial fishery, how is that distributed along the coast from now southern New England down to Florida. Thanks.
Jeff, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I understand the desire to kind of move forward on some of these items, but I also don't want to get ahead of the council, and would prefer, there's likely to be a lot of different changes, and would prefer to kind of handle this all together instead of trying to get ahead and do like a couple things here and there if we could. So my preference would be just to wait until the council kind of moves forward before we move forward. Yeah, and that's all I got.
Great, thanks, Jeff. That's good input. Not seeing any other hands around the table. I'll go back to Christina, and what's your perspective from council staff?
Thanks. So I think these are really worthwhile conversations to have. I think it would certainly be beneficial to have it sort of expressed from the commission this desire to move forward with actions related to Spanish mackerel that are not tied to the recreational catch levels and an updated stock assessment. I'm not sure our council is as aware of the commission's desire to start moving forward on some of this. And so I think if that desire could be made clear, it might, the council might reconsider some of their priorities. From a staff standpoint, I think we would still want to be, heavily involved in discussions related to this. And I would just sort of note, not to always bring it back to port meetings, but there's sort of a wealth of information in there on some of the issues that I've been hearing you guys discuss. Things like, trip limits and how to slow catch in the northern zone commercially is something we talked about at length when we were with stakeholders in Virginia, as well as Maryland and New Jersey. And so I think that report in particular could really paint a path forward for some of these issues.
Thank you, Christina. That's definitely helpful. Yes, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. The timing is key on this. And although, at least myself is interested in getting things moving sooner rather than later, then maybe the decision point on if this board takes on some of these items as opposed to the council, South Atlantic Council taking on all these items is when the stock assessment is completed and presented to the South Atlantic Council, because I think that would maybe be the point where the South Atlantic Council, in conjunction with the Gulf Council, kind of is on the clock for addressing these items at the federal level, and maybe then they can, as a board, we can discuss with those councils on what might make more sense to handle through ASMFC, as opposed to initiating an action now while the stuff's underway, and then we find we're just we have a disconnect again. I definitely want to avoid that from happening, because we've had some of those in place for a long time now. So I'm just kind of putting a marker out there as far as when we should start working on stuff, and maybe what makes the most sense is just let's see what the assessment brings, and then when the South Atlantic Council is ready to start working, that's maybe where some parallel work by this board can be done to cover some of the workload. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Other thoughts on that suggestion of just everyone hang tight until the assessment's done, and then we can decide how both bodies react in a joint conversation with the council, and as Jeff said, not get ahead of the South Atlantic Council. Are folks comfortable with that timing and that strategy? Yes, David Borden.
For my own edification, how long does it take the South Atlantic Council to develop regulations and then implement those? And the real question is, what's the delay in timing between the council finalizing its plan and the federal government adopting complementary regulations? How many years?
Christina, can you tackle that question, please?
Absolutely. So it depends on the complexity of the action and how controversial it is. I'd say for simple catch level changes from the council initiating an amendment to actual implementation of those catch levels, if it's a fairly straightforward amendment, can be anywhere from 6 months to a year. When we start talking about trip limit changes, regional allocation changes between, for example, the northern and southern zone for Spanish mackerel, which I anticipate to be pretty controversial, that's likely to delay the process, and that can take, a year or two. That necessitates, from the council standpoint, a full plan amendment, which means we have to go to both the Gulf and South Atlantic councils to get agreement, which can delay the process quite a bit. And then, once the councils have agreed and approved an amendment and transmitted it to NIMS, I don't want to speak too much on their behalf, but it can be anywhere from a couple of months to 6 months to longer, just depending on their workload and staffing constraints.
Great, Christine. You got a thumbs up from David Borden. So
yes, thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts on this? Yes, Ben Dyer.
Sure. I just like to say that I support that, waiting until that assessment to have more further information and the best path forward there, if that is, the joint management or wanting to do something in the interim. So we'll have more information at that point. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And Christina, I don't think Spanish mackerel is on your agenda for your March meeting in early March, but if there's value in me or you reporting out this conversation sometime under reports to the council, more than happy to do it, and just talk about the timeline. I just, don't want the council to think that the commission's moving ahead and getting ahead of them and having, so, if there's value in that, I won't be there in person, but I will be participating virtually. So happy to give that update if it's appropriate.
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate that. And we'll pass that along to sort of leadership and see if they feel like it's appropriate to include on the March agenda, because you're correct. The macro committee is not on the agenda for the foreseeable future until the stock assessment gets going.
Great, thanks. Anything else on this for Spanish mackerel? All right. All right, not seeing any hands around the room or online. Thanks again, Christina, for your participation, and we'll move along to populating the Spanish mackerel plan review team. Emily.
Yes, so while the board is convened, there's a couple of state updates to their representation to the plan review team. So for North Carolina, we have Sarah Pace nominated to take over the PRT for North Carolina, and Chris McDonough from South Carolina. This is for the Spanish mackerel PRT. So we're looking for the board to consider approval of those nominations. And there is a draft motion.
Anyone? Chris Bat-Savage. The motion will be coming up momentarily.
Yeah, thanks. Move to approve Sarah Pace of North Carolina and Chris McDonough of South Carolina to the Spanish mackerel plan review team.
Seconded by Ben Dyer. Thank you. I don't know, Chris, if you have any justification. It seems pretty straightforward. Shaking his head that he's all set. Any objection to adding Sarah and Chris to the plan review team for Spanish mackerel? All right, seeing none, thank you. They stand approved. That brings us to an addition to the advisory panel. I don't know if Tina or Emily is going to give that presentation. Tina's up. Go ahead, Tina.
Thank you. I'd like to offer for the board's consideration the addition of Robert Hale, a recreational angler from Georgia, to the South Atlantic Species Advisory Panel.
Thank you, Tina. Doug, would you like to make that motion?
I certainly would.
Not that one.
I'd move to
That one.
move to approve Robert Hale of Georgia to the South Atlantic Species Advisory Panel.
Great, thanks. Is there a second to that? David Sikorsky, thank you. And any objection to adding Robert Hale to the advisory panel? Seeing none, he is approved and now a member of the AP. That brings us to my favorite part, election of the vice chair. I think Ben Dyer may have a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the plan and the thought here is best done when nominating someone that is not here in person to defend themselves. So with that, I have the privilege of nominating Erica Burgess as the vice chair of the Coastal Pelagics Board from Florida. Thank you.
Great. Is there a second to that motion? David Sikorsky again, thank you. Any objection to having Erica as the vice chair of this board? Seeing none, congratulations, Erica. Wherever you may be, you are now the vice chair of the board. That's what you get for missing a meeting. So Jeff, you can report back that she's elected.
Yeah, while she's not here, if there's any other work or anything else you want me to assign to her, we'll go ahead and we can get that rolling right now too.
Yeah, we're going to do that under other business. So yeah, stay tuned. All right, great. That actually brings us to other business. Is there anything else before this board that you want to tackle on the coastal pelagic species before we adjourn? Seeing no hands, this board stands adjourned. Thank you all for your time today.